listening to the Author Inside You podcast, a weekly podcast designed to motivate you to finish writing a book, choose a publisher, and have your work build an audience. Keep listening if you're looking to get propelled into the next chapter of your life. And now, it's the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.
Hello and welcome to the Author Inside You podcast. I'm Matt Rafferty.
And I'm Leah Rafferty.
Our guest today is Neil Zurcher, author of Neil Zurcher's Favorite One-Tank Trips. Neil's written numerous books, but he's best known for his one-tank trip segments on WJW-TV in Cleveland. In fact, Leah and I were colleagues of Neil's for many years at WJW. Welcome, Neil.
It is so good to hear both of your voices. It's like old times almost being here tonight. Leah with a director's hat there and Matt telling me how to edit a piece.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful hearing your voice also.
Thanks, Neil.
So, Neil, you're
really two of my favorite people.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. Well, Neil, so you were doing the one-tank trip segments on TV, but how did that end up into a book?
Well, I was kind of lucky in a way because I was doing the one-tank trips, as you and Matt know, for many years on television, and we were putting out a little pamphlet every year that we were trying to satisfy the viewers who would write in later and say, where was that trip that you took 2 weeks ago or something? And the pamphlets we started giving out at the Sports and Travel Show at the Cleveland IX Center, and we did that for several years. And it got to the point where we were giving out 100,000 of these free every year. And people started to notice it, and of course the ratings went up at the station noticed it, and so I got more exposure there. And one day I got a call from this fellow that said his name was David Gray, and he was the president of Gray & Company Publishing, and he wanted to know if I'd ever thought about writing a book.
Wow, how nice.
And I said, gee, I've been writing these pamphlets. But I said, that's a great idea. I've thought about it kind of in the back of my mind. I thought maybe I ought to put this into a book that we could actually sell out there. And so David said he'd like to meet me, and he had grown up around this area. I had heard of him, but I didn't know much about the publishing business or anything else. And so David and I met one day at a restaurant on the west side of Cleveland. And I got there first, and I'm standing there. I'd never met David Gray. I didn't know what he looked like. And I'm waiting for some man in a suit and tie and everything, and nobody showed up. And there was this rather young-looking guy in a work shirt standing there next to the counter, and he and I were standing next to each other, and finally two ladies came in, and they recognized me from television. Okay. And so they came over and asked for my autograph. And I'm standing there signing autographs, and David looked at me, and he said, "You're Neil Zurcher?" And I said, "Yeah. Who are you?" And he said, "I'm David Gray." And that's how we met.
He didn't know what you looked like.
You set that up. No, and he said, "You set that up, didn't you?" And I said, "No, really I didn't." I said, I'm on local television. That's why the people knew me. And I don't think David watched a lot of television in those days. But in any event, we became friends, and he published my first book. And that was how I got into it, and he's published all the books that I've done since then.
So did you start writing from scratch for the book, or did you use the pamphlets, or did you use the segments? I mean, obviously the ideas came from the segments, but did you have to...
Yeah, you're right, Matt, they did. And a lot of the stuff in the first book were based on the pamphlets and on the trips that we took. But I pretty much, David right away, his editors shot me down on that because they said, you've got to come up with more material. We want a book, it's got to have at least 50 to 80,000 words in it, and these pamphlets are 1,000 words. So I learned right then that you have to write almost every day, and I had to find ways to look into the story. I had to go back and re-examine some of the places we'd visited because I was just writing about the stories themselves. And when you've got to fill more space, then suddenly you've got to find more information. And this was before the internet. when we did this. This was in the 1990s. And so in those days, we wanted to do research. It meant going to the local public library or getting on the telephone or actually getting in the car and going to one of these places. So it was a lot more work in those days than it is today. I mean, I think my first book took me a year and a half to write.
Oh, okay.
And the last one I did, The Best of One Tank Trips, which was, I think, number 7, took me about 7 months, which, because of the internet, it's there. It makes things a lot easier in researching. It makes contact a lot easier because a lot of places have sites and things now. And so it saved a lot of time. But I don't know I'd like to do it the way we did it the first time. That was not much fun.
Right.
It was a lot of work.
Well, how lucky, though, that someone came to you and said, do you ever thought about writing a book? That's pretty cool. And then you had a good story to go with.
That in itself was kind of special because I've met so many people since then that say, I want to write a book. How do I do it? And I'm going, I can tell you my experience. My experience is not the usual.
Right, correct.
I mean, I've known many people that have gone up from scratch to sit down and write a book, and it's a lot of work. But I keep telling students and other people that I've talked to over the years that writing the book sometimes turns out to be the easiest part. Mm-hmm. Especially if you're involved, even with a publisher locally, because the hardest part is, number 2, is getting the thing published. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of work. Yeah. And then an even harder job is marketing and selling the book. And that's really kind of the hardest part of the whole thing, because you get done, you put your heart and soul into writing this thing. The book's finally published, and you've gone through all this anguish of arguing with editors and arguing with this person and arguing with that person and trying to defend every line of your copy and, losing some, winning some. And the book's finally published, and then all of a sudden, you've got to market it. Mm-hmm. You've got to be here tomorrow. You've got to be there next week. You've got to be someplace else talking about the book. You've got to be out. You've got to be the face of that book. Mm-hmm. And it goes on for months. So it's kind of a never-ending process.
So what did you end up doing for marketing? Was the marketing done through Gray Publishing, or was it sort of on you?
Good question, Matt. When we first started, it was a whole different world then, of course, because you didn't have the internet, you didn't have social media. And so in those days, you fought for radio interviews, you fought for any television appearance you could get. You went to every newspaper in the state practically, because my book was for the whole state, in fact, the whole region. Mm-hmm. And we sent all kinds of press releases out. Gray and Company did that. They had a publicist at the time. She worked with me. She contacted radio stations and TV stations. I think I was on every radio station in northern Ohio.
Wow.
At least once when that first book came out. But I had an advantage there because I was a known quantity. I'd been on television. People knew who I was. And so we didn't have to go out and do the whole fight about, hey, I'm Neil Zurcher. I wrote a book, and you ought to put me on the radio because. Right. And that doesn't always work. I'm finding out what that's like now because I'm retired and I'm still trying to sell a book. And, of course, with the new social media, that's just 180 degrees from what that first book was like. Now I've got to worry about Facebook and Twitter, and I've got to worry about what are the other ones. I even forgot what I always get confused.
Snapchat and
Instagram
and
everything else.
Right.
Instagram, thank you. I'd forgotten that one, too.
That's where your grandchildren come in, right?
Oh, they do. They make fun of me.
That's not what I meant. I meant helping you.
Well, but the problem is you still have radio and TV concern, too. You've still got to try to get those radio interviews. You've got to get the TV interviews, and you've still got to get those newspaper stories. That's all important. It really is. And you work very hard to sell a book.
Well, that is interesting that have been able to see this process evolve. Like you said, it just started off with the radio and TV, but now it's this social media and how difficult. How do you reach all these people? But it's a new audience at the same time. More people will maybe hear about your book that did not before.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, now the thing is, how do you make something go viral?
Yeah.
How do you get something on YouTube, or how do you get something on Facebook to suddenly be repeated and shared and suddenly have 1 million people looking at it? And I haven't found the answer to that one. I wish I could.
Yeah.
I have not found it.
Maybe you could take a bath in a wine glass glass in the Poconos. Remember that story?
I don't think we should tell it.
Okay.
I was going to say, I don't think we should tell that story, man. all this inside jokes that we've had over the years.
Yes.
But you saw it. I mean, you saw me in those early years when I was struggling with this thing because you were both there.
Mm-hmm.
And you remember what it was like. I mean, I drove everybody in that station nuts because that's all I talked about was that darn book.
Yeah, but everyone was
And
excited
I'm sure
for
they
you.
all got... Well, I hope they were.
Yes, yes, of course.
They see me coming down the hall and they go, no. I know about one-tank trips. Leave me alone.
No. Neil is
but
the most loved person at Channel 8. Everyone loves Neil.
oh boy, wouldn't I wish? My name should have been Dick Goddard.
Yeah. You're right up there with them, Neil.
Right.
But it's funny, as I mentioned Dick's name. Dick, of course, writes for Gray and Company also.
Oh.
And
okay.
he and I had books out at the same time, and it was an interesting thing when we go out, because if you go out with a well-known personality like Dick Goddard, no matter where you go, even to stop to get a lunch, everybody is at your table. When I go to eat lunch, nobody bothers me. Well, rarely. Once in a while you get somebody, but in Dick's case, they're everywhere, and that was the way it was. And of course, he sold more books, and so you have to stop and think. How much of it was the popularity of the person? Mm-hmm. I'm not a fool. I mean, I understand it was because of my television exposure that I sold a lot of books. When that first book came out, it was on the Plain Dealer at that time had a bestseller list.
Oh. Okay.
And my one-tank trip book was on the bestseller list in first and second place for like 15 straight weeks.
Wow.
That's
And
impressive.
so it sold as many books as some books sell nationally.
Wow.
And that had to be, I mean, I'd like to credit Gray and Company and Jane Lassar, the publicist, but I'm a realist, and I know it was because of the time it was a popularity of Channel 8, and Channel 8 being, at that time, and probably still is, the #1 rated station in town.
Right. So yeah, I'm
So
sure that
it had a lot to do. So I was lucky. I guess that's what I'm coming down to. I mean, I'm not the typical person that wrote a book.
Correct.
I can't give you the
That
tips
we're
because I had
listening
a
to.
lot of things handed. A lot of things were handed to me on this one.
So when you put together this book and your other books, what about the artwork and the cover and the photos inside? How much say did you have over those?
Very little.
That was something the
I
publisher
walked
did?
in with suggestions, but David really listened to me. He did come up with the one thing. I insisted in the first book that I wanted the Nash Metropolitan, my little signature car, that I drove on the cover. And so he did finally go along with that. And as you can see, it's in the cover of the book. And they pretty much used my picture on most of the books over the years. There were a couple they did not. And those books didn't do very well. So I guess there is something to having the author's picture on the cover, especially a travel book. It gives them a little more identification that, this is the person. And in my case, I was a familiar person. So people recognized, the book on the bookshelves.
Right.
And I think that was a good thing. But I have not had much input, though, really, in how the cover is designed, the type of print they use, or how they lay it out. It's just
that's interesting.
whatever he wants.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's a huge difference between self-publishing now, where some people we've
absolutely.
spoken to, have designed the entire thing themselves or hired artists to do it, and then they approve everything and they want it their way. And then here you worked with a publisher, and they kind of decided for you because
They're the publishers, yeah.
they know best, right?
Yeah, well, they know what'll sell, or at least you hope they do, and that's why they do it. The same as the layout of the book. I mean, in my case, because it was a travel book, I had a certain idea how I wanted to see the trips laid out, and it was one of the things that we argued about a great deal in the production of the book was where certain stories would go. It may sound kind of silly, but I felt I wanted to take all the trips as like a radius out of Cleveland.
Okay.
And David wanted to put them in blocks. He wanted like Northeast Ohio, Northwest Ohio,
okay.
Central Ohio, Southeast Ohio, Southwest Ohio. And I said, well, that's all fine, but I said, how do we then explain a trip we took to Buffalo, New York, or to Erie, Ontario, or something like? Well, then we'll put those in a separate section also. And I just we argued, but I finally in the back said, "Hey, it's your company. I mean, you're the one that knows how to sell the books," and so we did it his way, and I guess it works. I mean, I've never had any complaints about it.
Right.
Yeah.
And how about book
But
signings?
it's one of the many things you do get into. Book signings, oh Lord, they can be a lot of fun. They can be also, there was one of the things in the early days when you had bookstores in every corner. And I'm sad to say we don't have bookstores all over the place anymore.
Yeah.
You've got a wonderful one there where you live there in Hudson, and that was Learn It All, right?
That's correct.
Correct.
Learn It All.
And they do it right. I mean, they do a really wonderful job over there. But I went to so many bookstores that were national chains, companies that are no longer in business now, and they would put me right by their front door in a mall. And I'd have a stack of my books there, and there'd be no publicity that I was coming. There'd be nothing else. They just figured my name was big enough and it would tell the whole thing. And I'd keep saying, "You've got to publicize. We're going to be there." They didn't do that. So I'd sit there, and what I'd do for an hour or 2 hours is answer questions. Where's the bathroom? The security office is down at that end of the mall. The bathrooms are to the left here.
Well, yes,
And
because no one's
know what-
expecting Neil Zurcher to be see there, right? They're probably you're taking out of
they thought-
context too. They're not thinking, oh,
Yeah, I'm just sitting at a card table out there at the edge front of a store.
yeah, that's interesting.
But if you knew the reporter from the
And-
TV station that you like is 10 miles away, you might hop in the car and go see him next Thursday at noon.
Yeah, it did happen. When we got a lot of publicity, we always ended up with quite a few people, especially in the early years. You had some bookstores that you'd get there and there'd be a line out the door. And that was wonderful. I mean, that really made you feel, boy,
Yeah.
I'm a writer.
That's a good
that
feeling.
was great.
Yeah.
But I must tell you this story. It was
good, yeah.
exercise in humility. I had a place in Warren, Ohio. I'm sorry the bookstore escapes me now, and unfortunately they're out of business now. But I pulled off the interstate, and I could see the mall from as I got off the interstate, and there were people lined clear down one whole block of it.
Wow.
There must have been 300 people standing in line. What in the heck's going on? I pull up, and they're all standing in line for this bookstore where I'm supposed to be at in 15 minutes.
Okay.
I walked in there and figured, man, this is going to be the best book signing I've ever done.
Yeah.
And big smile, I met the owner at the door, and she said, "Look, we're going to have to put you over in the corner here because there's so many people." And I said, "No problem. I'm just happy to see all these people." She said, "Oh, they aren't here for you." I went, "What?" There was a book out, a child's book called Gooseberries or something like that at the time, and he was there, and he had such a mob. I wondered why there were so many young children in the group outside, and that was why.
Come on, kids, we're going to go meet Neil Zurcher.
Yeah, I had about 15 or 20 people waiting for me, but it was still a very nice signing.
Yeah. Well, you always have good
that's
stories.
That's what happens. Well, there's other stories we can't tell you on the air about it, but the book signings can really be strange things. You meet some very interesting people, but most of them are very, very nice, and it's always great to do it.
Is it worth it? Well, once again, you're a little maybe different because people know you, but I wonder, well, I guess it's still exposure, even if, I wonder if people really do sell a lot at the book signings, or...
I don't think you sell a great deal of books at a book sign, at a bookstore especially, because they've got thousands of books that they're selling. What you do a signing at a bookstore usually for, I've been told this by my publisher, is for goodwill, number one, with the bookstore, because you want them on your side. You want them to present your book in the store in a very nice location. And if you go out and do a signing and bring some few customers into them, that makes them feel good about you.
Oh, okay.
And in the end run, while you've done it's public relations, basically. I think you sell more books if you want to do something like that at a speech. If you can go out to a church or a club or something like that where you've got people that come just to see you and your books are for sale that night, whether a local bookstore comes and offers them or you're self-published and you lug them around the back of your car, you'll sell a whole lot more books there than you will at a bookstore.
Oh, very
I
interesting.
mean, it's just a fact of life because you got no competition there. Where you're in a bookstore, why, 15 people may come in, but those are the people that really want to see you. But for the most part, well, you're just kind of at the mercy of the crowd there.
Or
Again, being in television though gave me an edge in a lot of places because I did attract a lot more attention, and I'm sure in those early days it helped sell a lot more books.
Sure. But yeah, that's good advice. If you're writing about a niche and you can get in front of a group that's interested in that, and then you have a book, right? So you're doing a speech in front of the Chamber of Commerce or whatever about starting a business, and then you have a book on that. It's a great idea to be able to sell the book to that group.
Yeah, I think almost any kind of book you can have a niche. I mean, you have people that love mystery writers, and I mean they'll turn out to a church or a club or a library. You have people that write how-to books as much as I do. I mean, you're always going to get some people out for that. And even if you write a sex novel, I'm sure you're going to get some people.
Right. Everyone has audience, right?
Spend the evening with.
Right.
But certainly there's always people that like any kind of a subject.
Okay.
Well, Neil,
and if you can tell stories, that's good.
Well, Neil, what's the best way to buy for our audience to buy your book?
Well, my book is available, as always, on Amazon. It's available at my website, which is www.onetanktrips.com. And on that blog and my weekly show, I put on a classic one tank trip every week. We take some of the old video that you probably edited many years ago, and we try to bring it up to date. We call the people and make sure everything's still open and that the place is still there. If things have gone out of business, why sometimes if I can't edit it out, my son, who can do a little bit of editing, goes in and he'll put a font over it that says either this is out of business or this is no longer possible. For example, last week we did the Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Mile High there, the inclined railway that goes above the clouds. And there was also a mention there of the Chattanooga Choo Choo, which is located in a hotel in downtown Chattanooga at the base of the mountain. And unfortunately, the Holiday Inn had owned it when we did the story many years ago. But it's still there. Everything's the same. It's just a different company, so we had to put a little disclaimer on that. But it's kind of fun. We're getting a few thousand people that watch it every week, and that's great. I mean, it's the kind of thing that.
Yeah. So you became a reporter. You're on TV. You get this nice segment, One Tank Trip. And then you turned into a book, and now you have this video blog. I mean, it's interesting. You never know where life's going to take you.
No, at age 81, I didn't expect I'd still be working even. But you got to remember, I mean, I literally was at Channel 8 for 54 years.
Wow.
And so that's a long time to be in television, and I've been a journalist since 1954. So that's 60-some years.
Wow.
So it's a long time ago.
Yeah,
I've had a lot of experiences.
First full-time reporter at Channel 8.
Yeah, that's what they tell me. As I recall it at the time, they used to use we had what they called booth announcers in those days. And they would sometimes grab a booth announcer who sat there and just said, "This is WJW TV," every hour on the hour. And they'd send them out in a story. Well, they weren't journalists. They didn't really know much about it. And I was news director of a radio station in Elyria at the time, and I got contacted by WJW in 1962. And they asked if I would like to be a freelance reporter for them while I was doing my radio duties out there. And so I started doing that. And so for the next 5 years, I was freelancing. And in 1967, they called and said, "We'd like to hire you full time as our first street reporter."
Wow.
And that's how it came. All the street reporters after that were after me.
Well, you must be doing
That was a long time ago.
a lot of good things because you stand out if people keep calling you and asking you if you want these opportunities. Not many people have that. That's wonderful. Very nice.
Well, I was lucky. That's really what I keep saying. Luck has so much part. In writing books, it's much that way, too. But if you know something, know your subject. I mean, anybody can write a book. Everybody walks up to me sometimes after a speech, and they'll say, I've got a book I want to write. I'm going to write a book. And I said, absolutely. I think everybody can write a book. The problem is you got to find somebody to publish it,
Right.
and you got to find somebody to market it.
Right.
And those are the two really tough problems. And I said, believe me, those are the things you really should look into before you start writing the first word. So, I think that's really important that you know those things. I've got a good friend that wants to write a book. He's got some incredible experience, funny experiences, got a great title. The title of the book would be, Here They Come, There They Go, Uh-oh, There's Trouble on the Track.
Ah.
He was in racing for many years.
Ah.
And he staged the first airplane demolition derby.
Oh, wow.
They only did it once because
wonder why.
the planes were so badly damaged they couldn't do it a second time. But he's got stories like that to tell. I think would be hilarious.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he'll ever get it done because he thinks it's so easy to write, and I keep saying it's not. You've got to sit down. You've got to force yourself to write every day. You've got to write a few words. I mean, when I sit down to write a book, this last one was a good example. I set aside at least an hour every day that I spent writing.
Okay.
Some days were many more, but at least an hour. Sometimes that hour I didn't get much done. Maybe I'd go back and rewrite something I'd written the day before, or maybe I'd rewrite it for the fifth or sixth time and finally just throw it away.
Okay.
But I still think it was important that every day I made myself write. And so it was surprising after a month or so, you look back and you say, boy, I've finally accomplished something. I've got this book started.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only way you can write. You've got to do it every day. You can't just say, I'm going to do it this week, and next time it moves me, or the next time I really feel like it, I'll sit down and write. You've got to do it and do it and do it and keep doing it. And then you've got to have a kind of a thick skin, because when that editor takes over, and believe me, you should not be your own editor.
Yeah. That's
Somebody to go over that book piece by piece. You need a professional to look at that, because even if you really know your English lit and you really are great, you're going to make mistakes. And better somebody else finds it and points it out to you. They may do things you won't like. They may want to change the story, and you'll spend a lot of time arguing about it. But you got to be passionate about it. You got to believe in what you write.
Well, you're filled with good advice for our fellow authors who are out there listening, Neil. Thank you very much. I mean, that was all great. You're getting a publisher, writing every day. I mean, writing every day, I think, is a great habit to get into if you're going to be writing a book. So that's all great advice. So thank you for that.
One other piece of advice I would give, too, is if you're going to consider self-publishing, remember, it sounds great. You're going to have a box of books there someday. But you've got to sell those books, and that means you've got to store them. You've got to haul them around in a car. And books can be heavy. I mean, they're not all e-books these days.
Right.
You still print paper books out there. And believe me, you've got to do all the bookkeeping. You've got to do everything that a publisher would do. So I would think long and hard if you really think you want to self-publish. Think about it.
Yeah, that's some people were saying that they have them in their homes, and then they have to, like you said, transport them. And where do they go, and how do you get them?
Yeah.
You have to find people where you can take them to.
That's right. You've got to find people who'll sell them. You've got to haul so many of them with you every place you go.
Right.
And then just the bookkeeping itself can be kind of monumental.
Okay. Good advice.
What's the best way our viewers can get in touch with you, Neil?
My email is just Neil Zurcher, my name, NeilZurcher @gmail.com.
And we'll have that on our website.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to communicate with anybody that wants to. A lot of people try to reach me through Facebook, but I don't do a lot through that messenger they have on Facebook because, very frankly, the thing is, you get too many people want to send you links to save your soul, or they want to change your politics, or they want to convert you. And I'm too old for any of that. So.
I'm good right now, right? Yeah. Well, thanks, Neil, for joining us today, and thanks for listening to the Author Inside You podcast. And until next time,
right on.
Thank you for listening to the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.